Your legs make a 90-degree angle at your knees. So if you're sitting up like this, your chair's too high, and if you're all like this, then that's going to hurt. The wheel. To use the wheel, this is your splash pan. This catches all the gunk that comes from the mess. So the big piece comes in from the back. You just kind of slide it under, and there's some tabs, so you'll feel it go under the tabs. It goes over the tabs. It's not working right. And you just got to shimmy it up. It goes all the way up. That has two little nipples on the bottom of it. Those nipples fit right in these two holes. Now those two little nipples fit right in those holes, just like that. And that's got your thing on there. When you see it, you should be able to see it. Your wheel head is right square in the middle. And that will catch 90% of the mess you make. Now, as you're using your wheel, you're going to use a lot of water. So yeah, the big piece goes in the back, little piece in the front. Now, on the side, you have a control panel on the right-hand side. Some of them are like this one. It has toggle switches. The front switch is just your power switch, which somebody left that one with the pedal stuck down. So the front switch is just your power. The back switch is your directional control. A button pad with just touch buttons. So you'll feel two buttons on it. The front button is your power. That turns it on. The back button is your directional control. So she's like, I'm still fighting with this. Just push it forwards. Pull it towards you. There you go, just like that. And that just pops right in there. Boom, you're done. You got it. All right, so now the buttons on the side, the back ones, your directional. Are any of you left-handed? Okay, so as a lefty, you will be working clockwise. Everybody else will be counterclockwise. So when you start your wheel, once it's turned on, you start it up. This one's going counterclockwise, so we're great. Oh yeah, I forget Virginia is the anti-pin person. That little bowl right there has the bat pins. So your wheels that do not have bat pins in it, yeah. Now, we got a whole stack of them here. So with the bats, you're going to find on the sides you have buttons. There's like 3 tabs on one spot and 1 tab on the other. Those all coordinate to the holes that are on the bottom. So there's an oval hole and a round hole. You will be using the ones, the difference is that these are an inch closer than these. So these wheels are all set up for the bigger holes. So you'll put the oval one on first and then set that one in place. Like I come here, put the oval one in, that gives me a little bit of play to get the other one in, pushes down, you just go like that, smack down, and you're good to go. So I'll take and use that one. So if your bat's sliding around like this, you haven't got it on the pins right. So get all set up, you got your stuff there. Now your pedal is kind of like the gas pedal on a car, but with cruise control built into it. So when I start my wheel, it's going, once I get it going, if I lift my foot straight off it, it'll hold that speed. So I usually set my pedal just a little bit forward so then I can bring my feet back and be anchored. I want both of my feet anchored on the floor so I can be nice and stable. You take your water. Usually our bats are good and clean here, but you do need just a thin film of water on there. So if you've got a dirty bat, you can just use your water, clean it off, and you're good to go. So once you got just a little bit of water, you can see how fast it's drying up. That you don't want more water than that. If you get it too wet, then your clay will just slide around. What that water is going to do is it's going to work with the moisture in the clay. It's going to create just enough surface tension in that water to make it stick to the bat. And that's why we call it throwing. No. Not necessarily. I just did this time because. But you want to make sure you get it as close to the middle as you can. Now, if you throw it down and you're not on the middle, you can rotate it a little bit and just use your hand, pat it to where it's at least in the middle of the bat. You don't want to get it off and you're going like this, chasing around, trying to push to the center. At least get it in the middle to where you can work with it. You still need water. You still need water. Well, I mean, where's your buckets?
I didn't get to it yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go get your water bucket. All right. So I'm going to blow through these steps of throwing, okay? Now, this first piece I'm going to do rather quickly, and then I'll do another one. Take a little more time, show a little more detail on those steps. Step one is centering. So what I got to do, that's not balanced. It's got more to one side, more to the others. So I got to get all that out of it. So I do that. I take my left hand, right hand for the lefty, and I get up here, ride this thing like it's a horse, get up nice and close to it. Use this part of my left hand. As that clay comes around, it's going to crash into that part of that hand. So I've got to make this hand as stable as possible. To do that, I put my elbow right in my hip like this, lock it in there, and as that clay comes around, it crashes into that hand. You see how that pushed a lot of that unevenness right out of the clay? Use lots of water. Water is going to remove the friction. It's going to make it to where it just slides through your hands. Now with my right hand, I work over the top of it, kind of like I'm karate chopping it. So I'm using that part of my hand right there over the top. So as I work that, I'm pushing down on the clay like that, and I'm working that unevenness out of the top. That also pushes down on the clay and makes it come back out. So see how the clay is coming back out there? So what we do is do this. Left hand moves it in and up. Right hand moves it down and out. And work it back and forth like that. After several times of working it back and forth, the whole thing becomes balanced. Just like that. Now you're going to find over the next period of time, this is the hardest part of the whole process for most people. Okay, so that's step one, centering. Once you have it completely balanced, now we turn it into a vessel. To actually make a vessel of it, we just put a hole in the middle. So I'm going to take one finger. You can use a finger. Some people like to use their thumb. Some people use one thumb. Whatever you want to do, you want to be very stable with it. So I'm going to put that finger in there. I'm going to use my other hand to brace that hand. So as I push down in there, I'm not bouncing. If you start following the clay around like this, you'll put unevenness into the clay. So you got to make yourself like a machine and just be there very super stable. So that's the initial part of opening. Now, I want it to be a bigger vessel than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull on it like this and draw it toward myself, opening that up more. So now I'm in a bigger vessel. The key to this opening part is when you center your clay, you've created a foundation, a base where you're going. When you open it, if I take this clay and I open it past where my base is, I'll tear it off. So I have to keep that clay in where I've set the base. If you pull it, so as you've got this, if you pull that out, then you shear that wall right off the bottom. So you can't open more than you've centered for your width. But if you did want to, then you just, yeah, if you want a bigger piece, yeah, you just have to center lower and wider. Now, when you're opening, you don't want to descend with your thing. So you've got a floor that you're trying to establish in your pot. If you're pulling lower and lower and lower as you come out, then you'll have a bottom floor that looks like this. It'll be too thin on the outside. I'll make it crack every time. So you have to go straight across the bottom as you pull out. So you got to make sure you don't descend. So that's step two, opening. Step three, that's setting the floor. So just like a house, a pot has to have a good foundation. Now, when we work the wall, we're going to be pinching that and compressing that clay the whole time. This is the only chance you're going to get to compress that clay in the bottom. So the clay particles, when we make clay, they're facing every which direction. They're like little bitty shards of glass. So they're facing all over the place. So what we do when we set the floor is we put pressure on it that starts to push those particles down together, and then they start to tie in together like this. That makes that bottom nice and strong. What happens is clay is going to shrink about 15% from now till it's finished. In that shrinking process, if those particles are not tied in and hooked up together, they'll crack apart. So you get what we call S cracks, kind of an S-shaped crack right across the bottom of your pot. So to set the floor, think of it kind of like a record player, but we work from the middle out. It's the opposite of the way the record player works. But just a little bit of pressure with the pad of your finger like this, and slowly let concentric circles be made all the way out your pot. Once you get to the outside, you come back in with that. Just work the clay back and forth like that. All you're doing is pushing down that clay, making it compress together, smoothing it out, evening it out. So you're both establishing the evenness of the bottom and compressing the particles. When you think you're getting close to where you want, there's two things you got to do. One is you got to figure out how thick your pot is. So you'll stop your wheel completely. You'll take your needle tool, just poke right through your bottom, run your finger down the side of that needle so you just feel your finger touch the clay, and then lift that whole thing out like that. Then you can see how deep and thick the floor of your pot is. You're just using that as a depth gauge to see how thick that floor is. You want to get about 1/4 of an inch, so that's pretty close to where we're at right here. I've done this a million times, so I can tell just by feeling, by touch, how thick a floor I've set. So if you want, I'll just continue to do this a couple times. If you want, just come look over the top, see how it's working. You can get up and come over and look. All good. You just take your time going back through. If you go really fast like this, all you're doing is putting spirals in it. You don't want that. You want even. So you got to take your time and slowly work your way in, just like a record player, and slowly work your way back out. Just compressing those particles together. Smoothing it out. They're all coming back into style now. Everybody wants to buy vinyl these days because they want to be all retro and like their mommies and daddies were. Yeah. So yeah, if you go too fast, then that just puts, see how it puts unevenness in it? So you don't want to create unevenness. You want to take your time. And so I'm just using the pad of my finger. Yeah, just so actually you're putting this finger over the top to help stabilize it. So I'm just more stable. So everything, I just kind of make myself as rigid as I can. So usually I open about twice as wide as I'm actually going to end up. Because I'll show you as we go through it and start pulling the wall how we do that. So that's setting the floor. So once you've established that base, and actually, yeah, everybody just stay and keep watching. This way this works better anyhow. So once you've established that, now we're going to start pulling the wall. So I'm going to use my left hand. My fingers are going to go on the inside, my thumb on the outside. Basically, my thumb's doing all the work. These fingers are just there for support, just to keep the wall from getting collapsed in. Now, take that thumb. Remember how we made our pinch pot? We were pinching that wall and pushing the clay up. Well, when the wheel's turning, if I apply a pinch, it makes it thinner there, but it applies that pinch evenly all the way around the clay. So I get a perfectly even pinch all the way around. So as it goes around, I slowly work my fingers up the clay, right like that. Now see how I'm taking my right hand and stabilizing that left hand so I don't bounce? If you just try to work like this, then you're going to have some, nobody's rigid enough to hold it nice and rigid. So make yourself, always try to work your hands together to make yourself as stable as possible. So I'll do a little bit of a pinch that way. I'll do another one. Thumb's doing all the work, and I just push the clay up. So we call it pulling, but it's really pushing. You're pushing the clay up the wall. So you see how it's stretched up now? It's about twice as tall as it was. So once we've done that, we start the process I call gather, choke, pull. Gather, choke, pull. So the gather is using the rib here. The rib's got two flat sides at a 90-degree angle and then a curved side. That curved side goes to the bat. That way, no matter how you hold it, it's always touching all the way to the bat. If you use it like this, then you end up with gaps. So this always puts that middle point, whatever's touching the bat, right there. You start with it perpendicular to the pot like that, slightly tapered out at the top in, and then you just slowly rotate that bottom in, pushing that clay back into the pot like that. So I gathered, that's why I call it a gather. We gathered all that excess clay back into the pot. So we do a gather, then we do a choke. So the choke, we're going to create 3 points of contact. Thumbs together like this are 1, and your 2 fingers on the sides like that. That size that you made with that gather, put your hands to it like that, right like that. You're going to catch that diameter. You're going to carry that up the wall. So I come in, I gather, I catch that diameter. I just keep my fingers really rigid, slowly working my way up the wall, and choke that clay right back into that diameter. So then I have a straight, even cylinder. So now we're too tall to work with just one hand. So I've got to separate and use both hands. So your right hand here, for your righties, is going to do most of the work. We're going to use this finger right along the edge of the side of that finger, mostly toward the fingertip. Another optional way for some people you might want to try is actually cocking it like this and working on the side of that knuckle. So you can try both, see which works better. I use the fingertip. I'll take the other fingers and I'll use them to brace that finger like this. So I'm sitting like this on the side. Okay? So your right hand's doing the work. It's kind of like somebody mentioned blacksmithing earlier. So it's kind of like the blacksmith. He's got his anvil, his steel, and his hammer. So your right hand, this is the hammer. This is what's going to be pushing, making it thinner. The clay is like the steel. That's what's being pushed thinner. And your hand is like, your left hand is like the anvil. So it just sits in here like this. Gives you something to push against. You're not pushing out with it. You don't want to work the clay this way. You want to work it in. So I'll put that hand in here like that. I'll take this hand here. And then I will do a little bit of a pinch against that finger on the inside and slowly bring that pinch up the wall. If you're pushing out, you're going to flay your piece out. We're not trying to make bowls, we're trying to make cylinders. We're trying to make the clay go up. Any unevenness that you've had in the clay is going to start to get worked out to the top. So if it's a little bit thicker on one side than the other, as you pinch that and you even out those pinches, it's going to push more clay up that side. So it'll start to get a little uneven at the top. And that's always going to happen. So we did a gather, we did a choke, we did a pull. So we'll do it again. Gather that bottom back in. We'll choke it right on up. And then we're ready for another pull. Put it in there, we use that finger, push in, push that clay up the wall. And just like magic, it gets bigger. So it's going to start to spread just a little bit. That's why we have to do the gather, choke, pull. Gather, choke, pull. That way you can keep a straight cylinder going. Be sure to use plenty of water. Keep it nice and wet so it doesn't start to stick into your fingers. You don't want to let too much water just pool in the bottom. So that's why I wick all the water out of there. So we've done that. We'll do one more pull. Yeah, so with big hands, it's harder to get that hand in there and do that. I've created a pretty thin piece now, and it's pretty narrow. So you can see how it's quite a bit smaller now than it was when I originally opened it. That's what's going to happen. I've pretty much finished the process of pulling. So before I start shaping, now we're going to even out that top. So you can see how the top's a little off. I'm going to use my needle tool. I'm going to use my left hand and bridge that clay. Finger on the inside, thumb on the outside, just supporting the rim. I'm using the needle. See how it's angled? So you don't want to go straight in. You want it to be at an angle. So I use my thumb as a guide. So I can be nice and stable and then slowly work my way through the clay. When I feel it touch that finger on the inside, you can just lift that unevenness right off. So now I've got a straight, even top. I'll bridge it again. I'll take a finger over the top, smooth it out. Got a really nice top on there now. And then I'll set my rim now. Once I set my shape, everything's going to be kind of hanging out and stuff. So what I do with the rim is I'll round it off like that. Don't get it too thin or it'll crack easy. You want your rim to have some stability or some strength to it anyway. And I always round it like that. So when we put the glaze on stuff, if you have a really pointed sharp corner like this, when that glaze melts, it's going to pool on the top and on the side and be really thin at that sharp point. So where you've got that sharp point on the edge, it's going to chip and crack real easy there. So if you round it out, then the glaze melts more evenly, making your whole piece stronger. So you'll have a better piece of wear if you have a nice rounded smooth edge. From here with my cylinder, I can go two directions. I can go out and I can go in. I know that sounds extremely rudimentary, but that's the truth of the matter. So I'll take my left hand, put it inside, it's still the inside hand, and to bring it out, I'll put a little bit of pressure in there, but I'm still doing a pull, so I'm setting the clay in that spot so I can make it come out and bring that wall out so I can splay it out a little bit. Now before I bring anything in, I'm going to get the rest of the water out of it. And then I can choke that whole thing. I can bring it in a little. And I can bring it in a little more. So I've choked it in quite a bit. So what will happen is you can kind of see it right here. See those kind of like fold marks and stuff? Mm-hmm. So it's just like a curtain. When you take a curtain that's all spread out and you fold it up, it all starts to fold. The outside, I'm applying pressure, but there's nothing happening on the inside, so it starts to kind of fold up on the inside. So you'll choke it a little bit, and then you'll do another pull right on that line to even out all those folds, make them go away. And being careful not to get water in it, then I can actually choke it more if I want. Working very delicately. You can bring them in quite a ways. I'm just choking in to just show you just how far in you can go. When you start choking, if it starts to get uneven like that, then you do well to even out that rim. This uneven clay does not like to choke. I'm kind of rotating it in. Okay. So if this is the wall and this is the needle, I'm just kind of rotating it in like that until it touches that finger on the inside, and then I can feel I can just pull that off. So you're going to get quite a bit thicker at the top when you start choking like that, because you've taken clay from pretty wide and you've spread it pretty narrow. So you can pull more height out of that now. But just so you can see, you can choke it as much as you want. So we brought it from way out to all the way back in. So you can move that clay quite a ways. So obviously this is really no point to a piece like this, but if I was doing like a vase or a cup or whatever, the last thing I need to do is clean up this foot. So you got to give it a nice foot at the bottom. If I left it like this, we'd have all that clay sticking out like that and it'd be really ugly. We don't want that. So I'm going to clean that up. That's what your wood knife's for. So you start right up here And you're going to start cutting down into that clay, getting rid of the stuff you don't want. So I'm just kind of following the same curvature of the line that the pot is, cutting and separating off that clay I don't want. That creates that nice ring of clay. I can take my needle, woo, when I don't throw it. I can just cut underneath that. That's faux throwing lines, so it looks like the lines of my finger. You can use your wood knife like that to make it look like that.
Wouldn't you have to put a hole in it someplace?
Yeah, if I were going to keep this like this, I would definitely have to put a hole in it. So that's one texture you can do. Another thing I do all the time is I just take it and go like this. This is kind of my signature move. So that gives you kind of a Celtic knot looking thing. You can go like this, do that same thing, but just keep ascending. And that gives you a wavy pattern. Or my personal favorite, I call it the mummy wrap. If I go like this, a little bit faster, a little bit wider, go one direction, then go back the other way. It looks like mummy bandages. So it looks like it's all wrapped up. So, if you put texture on your piece, when we glaze, the glaze melts and kind of levels out. It goes deeper into the texture and goes thinner at the top. And all these glazes have character based on how thick they are. So that gives a whole lot more character and beauty to your glaze if you have texture in your piece. If you throw a perfectly smooth piece, you're going to get a perfectly flat color. So I definitely encourage texture. So what I've done here, this is what we call a closed vessel. Nice thing is I've got that air bubble on the inside now, and that supports it. So I can do really nasty things to this clay that I wouldn't normally be able to do. So a piece that shape would almost certainly not stand if it didn't have the air in it supporting it. So, but that's just one reason you would even do a closed vessel. The only reason I made a closed vessel is just to show you you can take it out, but you can also bring it as far back in as you want. So, but John is right. If I were going to keep this, I would have to put a hole in it so that as it shrinks, it would create air pressure in there, so the hole allows that air to come back out.